All right, President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin speaking over the phone as tensions mount over Ukraine. Putin has an estimated 100,000 troops deployed near the Ukrainian border, raising fears that it's preparing for an attack. Moscow, though, has denied that it's planning an invasion and instead blames the West for escalating the situation. Joining me now is Matt Hayden, former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security for Cyber, Infrastructure Risk and Resilience, and the Vice President of GovTech Solutions at Exiger. Matt, this call is the second discussion between the two leaders this month, and Moscow is the one that requested it. So what's the significance of today's discussion?
What makes this significant is that it was requested by the Kremlin. So traditionally, it's us asking them to the table, and this time it's the other way around. If everything goes to accord, and we are waiting for a readout from that call today, we're hoping to hear that we were able to talk about the aggression and the lead up of the Ukrainian militarization. But what we're also looking to hear is how the Kremlin leveraged their talking points to try and test their negotiation stance with the United States leading into this January 10th meeting. So what's likely to see is where the Putin himself wants to look eye to eye into Biden and see where his poker face is on a lot of these sensitive topics leading into this meeting so he can try and build some strength going into that conversation.
Now, Putin has said over and over again that the military buildup is not an indication that it's planning to attack the Ukraine. But what do you read into his messaging of massing all these troops at the Ukrainian border?
It's a show of strength. What you see with Russian action is traditional show of strength, and so that people can see that they are strong. What we also see is that they will leverage everything within their power to get that strength. At Exiger, we have a challenge in which we see these diplomatic things take off, and we start to see the challenges around Ukraine and NATO and all these complications. The challenges that cyberspace makes diplomacy a local issue. You're going to find that not only do we have threats militarily, but you also have threats against our critical infrastructure and our operators that provide our military and our day in and day out life risk from cyber attacks that always seem to escalate just about the same time these talks start to occur.
Now, 3 rounds of talks between the West and Russia are scheduled next month with the U.S. meeting kicking off on January 10th. Do you think Moscow is serious about a diplomatic solution, or is this all just to provide justification for military action?
I think they're going to try and make a point that they don't want to see new members of NATO, that they are going to see that as a success. Whether or not that's a part of what's the outcome of that meeting, we'll have to see, but that is where they're going to hold the line in the sand. They're not actually going to say we're going to invade or not, or preventative for that type of language. And what we're seeing, hopefully out of our intel community that's correct, we don't expect there to be that level of invasion this time as soon or in the immediate forecast. But what we do look to see is to leverage that position into keeping people out of NATO that seem to the Kremlin and to Putin himself as something that would be chipping away at their strength position.
So President Biden has also said over and over again that a diplomatic path remains open, but what is he willing to offer Putin in exchange for diffusing this crisis?
Well, the first thing you do is you answer the phone. So we're doing the right first steps. You don't want anyone to go into a meeting not assuming what you're going to say. So these types of communications they're having are the right ones. The other challenge you have is there's really nothing on the table the United States is willing to counter on. We're not going to block someone from joining NATO. We're going to hold to the NATO alliance credentials and how individual countries become members. At the same time, we're not willing to back off on things like hypersonics or nuclear trade deals with other countries. So there is a position of a challenge the United States are in, and where we're not willing to lower our security to allow for this additional militarization to take place. So there's not a good example of what's on the table from a cards perspective other than to hold our ground.
Now, we know you are an expert on cybersecurity, so how concerned are you about Russia's violation of cybersecurity, and do you think Putin can or will use cyber attacks to pressure the U.S. and its allies to get what he wants?
Well, it's two-phased. Number one, we can't have these ransomware operators sitting in Russia as a safe haven, taking pop shots at anyone in the United States as they choose. And that's the number one focus we had starting off this year, was to communicate to the Kremlin that this was not okay, that there needed to be repercussions in the form of sanctions and additional measures from the United States should that safe haven prevail. Secondarily, the actual actions of Russia themselves, as we saw with SolarWinds and others, is to take a look at our national critical infrastructure, including cloud operations, and really target those, not just from an information collection perspective, but what they could look at to threaten us and to hold over as a deterrent to us when it comes to negotiations. We at Exiger try to make sure that all of our companies that are our clients take a look at the vulnerabilities that are available. Where are those cloud vulnerabilities that need to be patched? Right now, everyone is scrambling to make sure that Log4j patches are in place, but that doesn't mean you can't take a look at the short list that are those tools of the trade or those APTs that are Russian used. And you also can't just focus on Russia, because we will see actors out of the Iran and others that will lean in when they sense a good time to poke holes in our infrastructure.
And we know that a lot of those ransom attacks are coming from Russia, but is there signs that they're tied to the Kremlin in any way to serve for geopolitical interests?
Well, it's one of those things where if you know you have a criminal in your backyard and you're not willing to allow international law enforcement to take an assistive hand in flushing that out, you're effectively empowering or providing shelter. And that's where we are. We're not saying that the Kremlin is directing ransomware at this stage from a lot of the criminal groups that we're seeing tracking. What we're seeing is that they're just not being taken out. And that's what we need to have happen.
All right. Matt Hayden, former Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security for Cyber, Infrastructure Risk and Resilience, and the Vice President of GovTech Solutions at Exiger. Sir, thank you so much for your expertise and your time. Hannah?
And now for a look at